Welcome back everyone to Gacha Interact. We'll be taking a look at the first half of the 5.1 banners today. The first character we're going to be looking at is Xilonen, and the second character on the banner that's sharing a banner with her is Chiori. Now, if you guys have already watched the live stream, you probably already know that. We'll be taking a look at their weapons as well. So let's go ahead and look at both of these banners and see whether or not these characters or weapons are a good pulling option for you.
If you do enjoy the video, go ahead and like and subscribe, and check out the rest of the channel for other content you might find interesting. We do also have a Discord with a link down in the description if you do want to check that out, and we have a lot of cool people in there. Now, onto the video.
So the first thing we do want to talk about is looking at kind of each character. So first, jumping into Xilonen. Now, in a very basic sense, we're going to go over their kit, not really talking about going in depth, reading everything. If you want to know more about specifically Xilonen, which we're going to talk about first, we do have a pre-release if you guys want to go figure out that. Actually, multiple videos going about over the different versions of how she's kind of changed over time. If you want to go figure out how she works, you guys can go ahead and check out those videos on our channel. In a basic sense though, you are basically with Xilonen having multiple setups. Now, the last video we even talked about with Kazu is also talking about her. Basically, you're saying when you go into your skill, you'll immediately go into your Night Soul Blessing state. She's an Outland character, so she's going to have one. While doing so, she's going to put out 3 source samples that are kind of like these gems that are going to be sticking by her. And depending on the different elements of the characters in the teams, each of those are going to change depending on the elements of the character. So if you have Xilonen, a Pyro character, a Geo or a Pyro character, Hydro character, and a Cryo character, if it is the core 4, Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, or Electro, those samples are going to change. So it would be a Pyro gem, a Hydro gem, and a Cryo gem. So keep that in mind when you guys are kind of building your teams together, because those are going to signify when she's getting to a certain point in her Night Soul Blessing state, she's going to drop elemental resistance of enemies in the nearby area for the enemies, for her, her teammates to actually do more damage. So that's the major part of her skill. Her burst is basically either a healing mode or a damage mode. So if you have 2 of those source samples that have changed, they start out as Geo, but depending obviously on your team, if there have been 2 of those have changed or all 3 of them have changed, then you're going to actually have a healing mode that is going to happen with her burst with intervals of healing. Now, if you actually have her as only one of those source samples has changed, then she's actually going to be going into a damage mode where she'll do some extra damage. Her passive talents can kind of be flip-flopped on looking at what she can do here, but the whole point is to go a lot into a lot of defense as well as energy recharge for her as a character.
Now quickly looking at Chiori and kind of just what she brings to the table in the most basic sense. Normal attack, nothing crazy. You can get a Geo Infusion that I might talk about later, but that's not really the main part of her kit. The main part of her kit really is in the skill, because she summons a summon called Tamato, who deals Geo damage based on both your attack and defense combined. So that is definitely a good thing. She is a dual scaling unit, not a split scaling. So that's just naturally very good for her personal damage and stuff like that. So basically, when you use this skill, you can aim this around like catching or Alhaitham. You can go airborne with it, do a plunging attack, do some kind of cool stuff with it if you'd like. But the main thing is, after you use that skill, you can either use the skill again, you will summon Tamato, or you can use a normal attack. That's what gives you the Geo Infusion, and you can read more about that through her passive talent and how that works. But basically, you want the skill in most team setups because most teams are going to have Chiori off field. She's just better that way. And plus, you're going to actually get another summon if you have another Geo character in the party that creates a Geo construct. So characters like Zhongli, even Kachina, because her Turbo Twirly is considered a construct. There's a lot of things, a lot of characters like that are really good for her because they help summon more Tomatos. So that's basically how she works. Just off-field Geo damage through Tamato, kind of like an Albedo type character. And then with her burst, it's nothing more than just a big hit of Geo damage that scales based on, once again, both your attack and defense combined. So a very solid, very simple character and very fun character. There are new characters coming out left and right, and if Genshin does anything similar to what Star Rail has done, you should get to know my good old friend, Dead. If you're looking to lay down some money on some beautiful pixels and programming, then I'd highly suggest using Loot Bar to do it. With Loot Bar, you can top up your Genshin account at a cheaper price. It doesn't stop there though, you can use it for Honkai Star Rail and many other games that they support. There are several reasons why Loot Bar is awesome. Number 1, they only need your UID and server, making it completely safe. No emails or passwords are needed. Number 2, they offer 24/7 life support that I have tested at the most random times in the morning. Don't ask me why, or my wallet for that matter. Number 3, you can easily see the reviews people have left if you're still unsure about making a purchase. And number 4, you're guaranteed delivery in 30 minutes, but every single time I've made a purchase, guys, it has always been a matter of minutes, if not even seconds. Other creators have used Lootbar to top up their accounts, so if you're looking for credibility, here it is. Check out the link in the description or pinned comment, because Mavuika is simply too hot to miss. Now, back to the content.
Well, looking beyond each of the characters, with Xilonen, we have more of an extremely big support type character. Whereas when we look at Chiori, which Rift was just talking about, the character seems a little bit more like she's more focused into off-field damage and specifically goes into damage. So overall, now looking at the weapons, the first weapon we're going to look at is Xilonen, and we're going to see how this weapon ties in with her as well as other characters. The weapon goes into at level 90, 82.7% defense with a base attack of 542 at level 90. Now the refinements are going to be both stated for this weapon and the other at refinement 1. This states for the ability that it gains Ode to Flowers after normal or plunging attacks hit opponents as well. So if you hit an opponent, you're going to gain Ode to Flowers with a normal or plunging attack. Defense will then increase by 8% and gain 10% all elemental damage bonus for 6 seconds, and you can get 2 stacks of this. This can also trigger once per 0.1 seconds. When this effect reaches 2 stacks or the second stack's duration is refreshed, increase all nearby party members' all elemental damage bonus by 8% for every 1000 defense the equipping character has, up to a maximum of 25.6% for 15 seconds. Now, both of these characters actually are sword using characters, and specifically obviously going into, even though Chiori doesn't fully go into defense, this technically could be a weapon that you could use on Chiori, although I would not necessarily recommend it. Other defensive type characters are not really going to be using the swords anyways. Looking at sword users, really Xilonen and Chiori are the only ones that are going to really want the defense that comes out of this weapon. Technically, you could go for another Geo character like Albedo, so if you happen to have this weapon drop, Albedo could use it. I'm not really sure if that would necessarily be his best, but it does have a very high amount of defense, so that is technically good, and it will give some extra kind of buffs because of it for himself as well as other characters. So that can kind of be helpful if you accidentally get it and try to put it on Albedo. But really looking at the characters in a very basic sense, I would say that's really all who you would really want to put it on is Xilonen and possibly Chiori or Albedo.
Now looking at Chiori's weapon, this is called Uraku Musugiri, and this weapon at level 90 is going to give you 88.2% crit damage, so a very high amount of crit, and that's very good. And as we have already talked about, looking between Xilonen and Chiori, the basic difference between them is that Xilonen is a buffer type character, while Chiori is more focusing on damage, typically from off-field in the most cases, kind of like how Emily is in teams, Yaimiko, just a sub DPS, right? And so it's good that her weapon is a damage type weapon, giving you a lot of crit damage. It's going to have a naturally higher base attack as a 5-star, and we know that Chiori likes that because she scales both with her attack and her defense. But now let's look at the refinement ability, assuming this is refinement 1. It states that normal attack damage is increased by 16% and elemental skill damage is increased by 24%. After a nearby active character deals geo damage, the aforementioned effects increase by 100% for 15 seconds. Additionally, the wielder's defense is increased by 20%. So just a lot of solid stat increases. It's a very simple and easy to understand weapon. You're basically just going to be getting a total of 32% normal attack damage when you get that increased by dealing geo damage, which is going to happen without thinking because she's a geo character. And you're also going to get a maximum of 48% skill damage, which is going to be great for Tomato's personal damage. And then also 20% defense. It's just a very good stat stick for Chiori to get a lot more damage potential, allow you to run a crit rate circlet if you need the more of the crit rate because it's a crit damage weapon. It's just gonna be a very comfortable and easy to build type of weapon for Chiori. And in terms of other characters, because it isn't like defense, it does have a little bit more versatility just because of that and can be used as a stat stick in general, even for characters that don't like defense, because really in terms of defense, all you're getting is 20% on this. Everything else is pointing to the higher base attack, crit damage main stat, normal attack, and elemental skill damage. So that's going to work for a lot of sword characters just in general. If you happen to have this, it's going to be better than pretty much any other 4-star option for catching, Furina. Now, it could depend sometimes, like if you have Festering Desire, that's going to be just naturally very good for Furina. She just really likes that weapon. If you have Black Sword or Battle Pass weapons in general, those tend to get really close because they are Battle Pass weapons. So those tend to be like 4.5-star weapons, if you will. But if you do have this weapon, it is very easy to just slap this on any sword character just because of the stat increase.
Now looking beyond the 2 banners, now let's go ahead and talk about, just talk. There's a little bit, we can kind of push the banners aside. Now it's just time to talk, Rift. So the first question we have that we want to bring up for a lot of people is, do you actually need the character? So in a very basic sense, for me at least, I want to hear your thoughts on this, but with Xilonen, we just talked about in our last video how well Kazuha is still an extremely strong character. And because of that, Xilonen, though, does have a lot of similarities between her and him. For me, I think Shilonen's very high on the pull list. But if you have Kazuha, we talked that technically if you have Kazuha, it's almost like getting just another Kazuha as a character. Now, the good thing about Xilonen is that she can work in Geo teams, so that's maybe an extra bonus, and then Kazuha also has his own personal bonuses as well. So, do you actually need the character? I think if you don't have Kazuha, I think Shilonen's pretty high up on the list. Also, if you want to go after Natlan-specific characters, Shilonen's also very high on the list. Kazuha, though, even if people have Kazuha, I do want to say, though, that Shilonen's still a pretty good pull. Like, you're not necessarily going to lose anything. I think we talked about this in the last video, that even if you, kind of like, let's say if you have Ayato and then you have Neuvillette. Obviously, Neuvillette is going to take precedence if you need an extremely strong character most of the time to take out an enemy, or if you're going to put in the Abyss or something in extremely hard content or whatever. You're probably going to run Neuvillette to just make your life easier. And so Ayato loses place almost. Whereas with Xilonen and Kazuha, just because you have Kazuha doesn't mean you can't, you now, if you get Xilonen, you now can't use your Kazuha. Xilonen allows Kazuha to be on one side and she can be on the other. So Rift, what are your thoughts on if a person is looking at their accounts, do you actually need the character?
I think that's a very great point that you bring up, because I think it's because that they are supports just in nature. When looking at Xilonen and Kazuha, there is just a lot more versatility, whereas a DPS is one in the team, and it's just kind of like one or the other in terms of Abyss and stuff like that. Supports are just more versatile. They can be thrown on a lot of different teams. So I think that's kind of why, if people want to, well, why is that the case? Why, is there less versatility? It's like, well, I have both Mualani and Neuvillette. Why is it harder to throw them around usually? Well, you build a team around a DPS, not usually around the supports in the team. And so because Xilonen and Kazuha are supports, they're going to be thrown around a lot of different DPSs, a lot of different teams. So having both isn't a bad thing. If anything, I would say it's a good thing, because they are just different. They have different pros and cons that we talked about in the last video. So if you don't have Kazuha, Xilonen is a very, very good pickup. Highly recommend. I think she's one of the best characters in terms of value for an account in general since Furina, because Furina is just an amazing support. Talking about like newly released characters, supports just have high value. They just do, because you always want to have those at some point on your account. Whether or not you pull a DPS sooner or later, supports is always the next thing you think about. And so characters like Xilonen in this case, Furina, Kazuha, characters that are always going to have value, even if you have all of them. If you don't have any of them, at least get one of them. So however you look at it, Xilonen is pretty good for all accounts, free to play all the way up to veterans that just have everyone. She's a great character. She's going to get used and has those Natlan mechanics. So to kind of answer your question, and you kind of hearing my thoughts on that, that's just where I see it. I don't think she's a bad pull in any regard.
Well, now that we've talked enough about Xilonen, looking now on the other half of Chiori, personally for me, I don't see really a lot of need to pull Chiori, unless you already have another Geo character that you actually like to use pretty consistently. But even still, I have a Geo character I like to use pretty consistently, and that's Navia. But I wouldn't necessarily say that Chiori is a very high pull value on my account to go for Chiori. If anything, if you have really the only Geo character in your account is Navia that you actually like and maybe use consistently, I would actually say Shilonen is the better pull just because she can help Geo more. Also, she's a better, just she helps better with the team because you want to have another Geo character with the Navia team. With Chiori, though, Chiori is all about personal damage. Like we were talking about with Shilonen, she's a support, so she's much more versatile. Chiori really only fits, and I'm not necessarily saying that she only fits. I'm sure she can be used in other teams, but mainly if you're going after Chiori, it's for Geo-specific teams or Geo characters that use constructs. So like we were talking about earlier, Zhongli, even the main character who can create a construct, Itto, who you're probably going to be pairing with her pretty well and pretty consistently as well. Characters that are going to be able to put out a Geo construct, she's going to like more because of the passive talent that she has, or whatever part of her that actually talks about giving her another Tamato. I really do think that overall she's probably not very high on the pull factor. Extremely fun character, but I don't really think a lot of players actually need her on their account.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair assessment. She just, like you said, if we're just being honest, it's more of a veteran pull, if I may. You kind of want to already have these other things on your account. Now, you can be building for a team that does involve Chiori. There are definitely teams out there. You could do Neuvillette Farina, one of the most awesome dynamic duos, and then also use the dynamic duo of actually Chiori and Zhongli. If you already do have a character like Zhongli, or you really just like to use your Kachina, Chiori just, once again, likes characters like that because they have constructs, and you can do a lot of different double Geo, double Hydro, double Geo, double Pyro. Teams like that work pretty well. And because Geo Resonance is actually pretty powerful, if you actually go look at it, you're getting shield strength, you're getting just more damage. It's not just more Geo damage. You actually get more damage in general to the character that has the shield on. So doing something like Zhongli Chiori is going to actually help you in Neuvillette, especially if you don't have the C1 on Neuvillette. That team's going to feel very comfy because you have both the Hydro and the Geo Resonance. And there's a lot of other cases that can be made that will end up doing that. A Pyro team's going to give you the attack. We know Chiori likes that. Even Zhongli likes that if you have the hybrid build. So there's a lot of cases that can be made. But just at the end of the day, I don't think I would be pulling Chiori unless you already have a character like Zhongli, or it's like Vixen said, honestly, just pull Shilonen first because she's just more versatile for the more mainstay type teams. Unless you're a Geo supremacist where you always pull the Geo characters, you're gonna love this banner because we have one new Geo character and another Geo character getting their first rerun. So it's a very high value banner for people like that. But that's just kind of my thoughts. I think she has her placements. They're just kind of unique to a little bit more specific, or maybe more highly invested teams that usually have more 5 stars, more personal weapons involved to actually get to a point where it's like, yeah, this is a good pull for my account.
Well, looking beyond the first question of do you actually need the character, the second question is what kinds of teams are you trying to build? So Rift, overall, when looking at both these characters, what kinds of teams, and I know we've definitely talked about it a lot, so this is probably going to be a very quick question, but what really are we looking at for teams?
Well, I'll start with Chiori since my train of thought is still there and I was just talking about it. And I was actually talking about teams a little bit there. Really, when it comes to Chiori, I think a lot of the best teams that you can do that maybe aren't so centralized around her, but just the team's overall damage are going to, once again, just be the double Geo, double whatever teams, because she is an off-field damage dealer. And so having Geo Resonance is, once again, going to feel really comfy. Teams that don't have Geo Resonance, though, you can do those, and that's fine, and that's great. But the thing that Chiori misses out on is not having another Geo character, which means you're not having another Geo construct, which basically halves her off-field damage because you're going from 2 tomatoes to only 1. So it's pretty important with Chiori to actually have that other character that can provide the summon. Once again, it can be a free character like Kachina. Everyone has that if you've done the 5.0 quest on time. And so that's a character you can use. The most free-to-play team, I think, with Chiori would actually involve that. You would have Kachina, Chiori, and then just 2 other characters, preferably of the same element, so that you have resonance or just high damage dealers, whatever you're kind of doing there. But Chiori, once again, just really needs that Geo construct. Now, once again, you can get away not having it, but you have to just realize that your damage is going to greatly be impaired because of it. Now with Shilonen, there's a lot more versatility. She just works completely different. We went from a damage character in Chiori to now a buff type, a support type character. So this character, Shilonen, is going to be wanting to be placed with non-Geo characters and even some Geo characters because she can just increase Geo damage for the overall team. So she just has a lot of good value because of that.
I totally agree. I think overall, the supportive capabilities that Shilonen has are going to be way more widely useful because you're going to want teammates or whatever that are actually of that core four, the Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, and Electro, and even the Geo characters as well. So just a lot more versatile and a much better character. Obviously, we know Kazuha is very versatile, so very different than what we saw in a character like that with Chiori. The last question we have is, do you actually need the weapons? I'm going to go out on a limb here and just say no on both. I know usually we go on the whole like, okay, let's try to deep dive into this weapon and why this weapon could work here and why this weapon could work here. I think Shilonen's weapon is one of the best supportive weapons actually I think I've ever seen in my entire life, and I'm so actually excited to get it.
It is very good. Yeah.
But even with the weapon, it's not worth it. Most support 5-star weapons, I don't think I'm gonna necessarily tell people to pull on anyways, because supportive 5-star weapons are usually not that, 1,000 yards ahead like DPS weapons are ahead of the 4 stars. So a lot of the times you can save a lot of pulls on support 5-star weapons and get characters rather than go for weapons. Now, if you really like Shilonen and you want to go ahead, or Chiori and you want to get their weapon, go ahead. Now, I'm mainly talking about Shilonen's weapon here because she is a support character. Once again, her weapon is actually amazing, and like I said, one of the best 5-star supportive weapons I think I've seen in the game as to date. But looking at Chiori's weapon, I do think it's a pretty good weapon as well. Do I think there are better options? Definitely, but it's a very high stat stick weapon like Rift was talking about. It's going to make your crit ratio easier to get, especially since Chiori already ascends into crit rate, her weapon going into crit damage. That's going to help her out more. But overall, no matter what, on both of these weapons, I just don't feel like there's enough pull factor to really getting the weapons for these characters.
Yeah, and I think that's once again a fair assessment. Yeah, like you said, when it comes to supports, I actually really like how you put that with the 4-star going to 5 stars. There are just 4-star options for supports that work well enough. Let's just put it that way. Maybe they can be sometimes far off, but like if we look at a character like Kazuha, for example, the difference between Freedom Sworn, his personal weapon, and these other EM 4-star swords, there's a difference. It's definitely there because he's giving like a massive attack bonus to the other characters in the team with his personal, but that's all it is. It's just an extra, okay, have an extra, tenacity or noblesse oblige type buff in the team. Is it really worth 80 pulls potentially for something like that? You can get away with that just by building better artifacts on the other characters, collectively, or just pulling the DPS's actual weapon. That's going to be a lot more damage. So that's just something to think about. It is a very good weapon for Xilonen. Talking about hers, Peak Patrol Song, it's got a lot of great stats on it. It's very good. And same thing can be said for Chiori. But once again, there's actually, well, the funny thing is with Chiori, there's actually a fantastic 3-star option being Harbinger of Dawn that's not bad at all. And honestly, when you look at 4 stars, maybe even more preferable, especially for just crit building on her, because she's a damaged character. She wants a lot of good crit, and there's a lot of free crit rate plus the crit damage main stat just given to you. And it's going to make building Chiori really easy. And this is also very free to play, because most free to play players, if you spend just a little bit on the banner with your fates, if you decide, or even on the standard banner, you're gonna get, and even the limited banner, you're gonna get a lot of 3-star weapons. Thrilling Tales, they're all out there. So chances are, if you're pulling for Chiori herself and you don't want to touch the weapon banner, which you can't go wrong doing that because you're just saving pulls, characters, DPS weapons are usually a little bit better, then you can totally get away with Harbinger of Dawn. And that's something that if I had Chiori would probably just stick with, if I'm being completely honest.
Also, and to bring back up your point even further, with the Chiori specific teams like we were talking about, using characters like Zhongli, a lot of Geo characters go heavy into shields, keeping the ability on Harbinger Dog, which I'm pretty sure is staying above 90% HP, right?
Yeah.
So that's going to be very easy to do because the whole point of the team is not to lose HP. So whereas you have to worry about heals with other characters, she's not going to really... Hopefully the other characters aren't going to allow that to happen.
I would think that as long as you make Chiori in the rotation right after your shielder, or somewhat, not too much time has gone by after you activate whoever your shielder is, she'll never get touched because she doesn't stay on field most of the time.
Yeah, exactly. And even going back to Freedom Sworn versus, the other weapons like we were talking about, even if you get the normal and plunging attack damage bonus and the 20% attack, like you said, even the little bit of extra, EM which it's a little bit more than little, but still, it's just how much better could a DPS weapon be? So I think that's the overall idea. Looking beyond weapons, though, Rift, what can you tell us about the characters at C0, plus looking at cons? For me personally, I think both these characters are amazing at C0, but for one of the characters, I know that looking at Constellations is definitely going to be an eyesore and a half for a lot of people if they stay at C0 for a while.
Yeah, so looking at Xilonen first, her constellations are pretty good. Let's look at our first one. It states that Xilonen's Night Soul point and phlogiston consumption in her Night Soul's blessing state is decreased by 30%, and her Night Soul point time limit is extended by 45%. Additionally, when Xilonen's source samples are active, she can also increase nearby active characters' interruption resistance. That's a pretty good utility type constellation. You're not directly buffing damage numbers, but just because you get more Night Soul point and the time limit is extended, that's a really nice, that's going to be like very comfortable and is technically more total DPS of the team because you are adding more to it, even though it's not a direct damage buff. And then also interruption resistance is a big deal for, honestly, at this point, a lot of different DPSs really want that. Even a character like Arlecchino, Neuvillette is probably one of the most demanding DPSs for having interruption resistance, and the list goes on. There's a lot of characters that actually do want that. Yoimiya is a good example of an early character that always wanted a shield so you don't mess up the normal attack chain, so you can get to that normal attack 5, I think it is, and do a lot bigger multiplier. So a constellation like this is going to allow for even future DPSs that you might get just a lot of ease of use, and so that's a very good constellation. Looking at her C2, it states that Xilonen's Geo source sample will always remain active. I don't know about you, but that already sounds good. Additionally, when her source samples are activated, all nearby party members will gain effects corresponding to the active source sample that matches their elemental type. So this will change based on the team you're putting Xilonen in and based on which source samples you are activating on the elements, right? So with Geo, you're going to be getting a 50% damage bonus. With Pyro, you're going to be getting 45% attack. With Hydro, you're going to be getting 45% max HP. And with Cryo, you'll get 60% crit damage. And then for Electro, you actually restore 25 energy and decrease the elemental burst cooldown by 6 seconds. Every single one of those different buffs you can get are pretty amazing. They're very high as multipliers. Your HP, your attack, scalar type characters really going to like that 45% increase. For Geo, just here's 50% extra damage. That's pretty insane. For Cryo characters, I like that it's crit damage because most Cryo characters, the way they kind of function is giving themselves crit rate. Even if you aren't doing a freeze team with like Blizzard, if you're using something like Marshal Zay, which would entail Farina, you know, I still think there's different ways. I just like that it's crit damage. For some reason, it does feel pretty easy on Cryo characters, even outside of Blizzard or something like that, to get crit rate. You have characters like Rosaria that just help you with that as well. So I like that. And then Electro, I mean, you're decreasing a burst by 6 seconds. Forget the energy restoration, which is really good. 25 is a lot, but decreasing a burst cooldown, that's insane.
And that's actually compared to, if you look at Raiden, I believe she also does so in her C6, I believe, or one of her constellations.
Yeah, it's in the C6, yeah.
Yeah, she also decreases cooldown of burst. So getting this in a C2 of a support character is just absolutely insane. And not even an energy, an Electro character. So now that we're going to go over, now we've looked at Xilonen, let's go ahead and look at Chiori. Overall, should you just keep her at C0? I think me and Rift can both agree to this. Keep her at C0. Xilonen's probably the one that you're looking at constellations, kind of like Kazuha. You're looking for that C2. Same thing with Xilonen. Even the C1 is still really good for, probably more Xilonen than Kazuha, but C1 is still nice on him as well. I think overall, those constellations are going to be nice. Not to say these constellations aren't good for Chiori, but the C0 just does fine without them. Now, going ahead and looking at the first constellation, though, it states that the AoE of the automaton doll, Tamoto, summoned by Fluttering Hasod is increased by 50%. Additionally, if there is a Geo party member other than Chiori, Fluttering Hasod will trigger the following after the dash is completed. You will summon an additional Tamoto, and only one additional Tamoto can exist at one time or the same time, whether summoned by this way through the C1 or the presence of a Geo construct. This can allow Chiori to possibly be put into or even if there's another Geo character, for instance, like I was talking about with Navia, this allows you to have 2 of them at one time without actually having that other Geo character make a construct. or if there was another character that's Geo that doesn't create a construct. This also can trigger the passive talent, the finishing touch, and this effect requires you to first unlock that passive talent anyways. Now looking at the C2, it states that for 10 seconds after using her burst, a simplified automaton doll, Canoe, will be summoned next to your active character every 3 seconds. Canoe will attack nearby opponents, dealing AoE Geo damage equivalent to 170% of Tomoto's damage, and damage dealt this way is considered elemental skill damage. Canoe will leave the field after 1 attack or after lasting the 3 seconds. So because it's 10 seconds and it can happen every 3 seconds, you're going to get 3 of these hits off basically after using your burst, which is just some extra damage dealt. It is nice though that it's 170% of Tomoto's damage rather than her attack or her defense or whatever. So that's also very nice. That being said, I still think if you're going for constellations, I personally think the C1 is fine if you want to stop there, but neither one of these constellations are really anything that change the game for Chiori or change the game for, other things. Now I did talk about if you have a character like Navi or whatever and you want to have double the amount of damage out without having another Geo character that puts it out, or if there's not a Geo character there and it's just Chiori by herself as the only Geo character, technically the C1 is pretty good, but I would just say the C0 kind of allows Chiori to be kind of who she is anyways, and the C1 and the C2 aren't really worth it for the extra 80, 90, or more pulls based on what you can get for her.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that. Well, we hope that this video could help you decide on whether these 2 characters or even the weapons coming up on this banner are for you.
As always, if you have any suggestions, please go ahead and let us know down in the comments. Also, make sure to like, subscribe, and check out our Discord as well if you guys did like the video. So thank you guys for watching the video, and we'll see you guys in the next one.